There was a time, not long ago, when Dubai was nothing but sand. The Persian Gulf lapped quietly at its shores, and the only towers that pierced the sky were date palms swaying with the wind. No glittering skyline, no luxury hotels, no artificial islands. Just a desert town with wooden boats, fishermen, pearl divers, and a few thousand souls trying to survive where the sea met the dunes. But in that quiet place lived a man who could see beyond the horizon. Sheikh Rashid ibn Said al Maktoum, born at the start of the 20th century, was not a man who accepted limitations. In an era when most rulers in the Gulf were content to preserve the past, he imagined the future. He did not just dream of wealth, he envisioned transformation. In the 1950s, Dubai was a struggling outpost. British colonial influence kept the Trucial states under indirect control, and the global economy offered little mercy to such remote places. The local economy relied heavily on fishing, boat building, and the pearl trade and industry that had already collapsed under the weight of Japanese cultured pearls. The people of Dubai lived humbly, often without electricity or running water. Roads were unpaved, homes were simple wind-cooled structures, and the creek that split the city in two was filled with silt, making it difficult for large ships to enter. Commerce, if it came at all, arrived on wooden dhows and left with pearls, dates, and fish, but Sheikh Rashid looked at that creek and saw a future port. Others called it madness. The British advised against it. Engineers warned of the cost. Dredging the creek would require massive resources, and there was no oil money yet no black gold to finance such ambition. Yet Sheikh Rashid persisted. He took loans, negotiated with foreign banks, and diverted what little revenue the city earned toward infrastructure. In the early 1950s, he made a decision that changed everything. He would dredge Dubai Creek. The project began in 1959. It was a financial and engineering gamble. Rashid believed that deeper waters would allow larger ships to dock, increase trade, and attract foreign businesses. He understood that ports were the veins of global commerce. Without a natural harbor, he would build one, and he did. When the dredging was completed, trade volume surged. Suddenly, ships from India, Africa, and Europe began docking in Dubai. Merchants followed. Money flowed. Sheikh Rashid knew that infrastructure was power. Over the next decade, he directed funds into building roads, schools, hospitals, and housing. He sent local students abroad to learn engineering and business. He invited British, Iranian, Indian, and Pakistani investors to open shops and factories. He was planting seeds in the desert not for crops, but for a future economy that would not depend on the earth, but on imagination. Then, in 1966, came the moment that would change Dubai forever: oil. A field was discovered off the coast, and Dubai's first exports began 2 years later. But Rashid had already decided he would not let oil define Dubai. He saw what dependency had done to others. Instead, he would use the revenue to accelerate his vision. He did not build palaces. He built ports. In the late 1960s, Sheikh Rashid approved plans for Port Rashid, a deep-sea port that would handle container ships and rival any in the region. Again, the world doubted him. Again, he proved them wrong. Port Rashid opened in 1972 and quickly became one of the busiest harbors in the Gulf. What made Rashid unique was not that he had oil, but that he didn't rely on it. He viewed oil not as a blessing, but as a bridge, a temporary means to a permanent end. He once said, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father rode a camel. I drive a Mercedes. My son drives a Land Rover. His son will ride a camel." It was a warning, not a prophecy, a reminder that wealth without vision is fleeting. While other leaders built around palaces and tradition, Rashid built around people and opportunity. He allowed expatriates to work, live, and own businesses. He created zones where foreign companies could operate tax-free. He reinvested oil money into aviation, tourism, education, and healthcare. By the early 1970s, Dubai was no longer just a fishing village, it was a rising commercial center, a bridge between continents. Rashid's policies drew migrants from across the region. Indians, Iranians, Egyptians, and Europeans arrived in growing numbers. The city grew, block by block, year by year. Buildings began to rise, roads expanded, and neighborhoods like Dera and Bur Dubai became centers of trade. By the time the United Arab Emirates was formed in 1971, Dubai had already positioned itself as its most dynamic emirate, but none of it came easily. Rashid had to balance tribal traditions with global ambitions. He navigated complex relationships with Britain, Iran, and neighboring emirates. He built alliances with merchants and tribal elders, offering them shares in his vision. He took risks, both financial and political, because he understood something fundamental. If Dubai did not leap forward, it would be left behind. And so, before the age of digital skyscrapers, artificial islands, or supercars, there was a man and a plan. A ruler who stared into the void of the desert and imagined something greater. Sheikh Rashid ibn Said Al Maktoum did not inherit a metropolis, he built one. Brick by brick, trade deal by trade deal, he laid the foundations of what would become one of the most iconic cities on earth. His story is not as well known as the towers that now bear his name. He did not live to see the Burj Khalifa, the Palm Jumeirah, or the sprawling financial districts that now define the Dubai skyline. But without his vision, none of it would exist. Before there were cranes and concrete, there was conviction. Before there was glass and steel, there was sand and a man who believed it could become something magnificent. In the shimmering heat of the Arabian desert, a single discovery can change the destiny of an entire nation. In the case of Dubai, that discovery came in the year 1966, when seismic surveys led to the revelation of commercially viable oil reserves off its coast. For many, this would have been the turning point toward a familiar narrative: oil as salvation, as power, as the beginning and end of prosperity. But for Sheikh Rashid ibn Said Al Maktoum, it was something else. It was a moment of opportunity. Yes, but not of dependence. He had already begun building a vision for Dubai long before a drop of crude had ever been pumped. Oil to him was never the foundation. It was fuel for the real construction. The first shipment of oil left Dubai in 1969, just 3 years after the initial discovery. It marked a historic occasion, not only for the emirate but for the Trucial states still under the British protectorate system. For a young port town trying to position itself between global powers, this new source of wealth presented both promise and peril. Sheikh Rashid knew this better than anyone. He had watched as other oil-rich regions in the Gulf transformed overnight lavish palaces, fleets of imported luxury cars, and public spending that created dependency rather than development. He would not walk that path. Instead, Sheikh Rashid treated oil income not as the endpoint of development, but as its launchpad. Even before the first barrels were sold, he had already begun the process of turning Dubai into a logistics and trading hub. The dredging of Dubai Creek was complete. The city's first real road network had been laid. And perhaps most crucially, Sheikh Rashid had begun building a global reputation not as an oil state, but as a gateway. When the oil revenue arrived, it was immediately channeled into infrastructure. In the 1970s, projects that would have taken decades elsewhere were accelerated to lightning speed. Dubai International Airport was expanded. Roads were paved across the city and into the desert. New housing developments were built for both emeritus and migrant workers. Education and healthcare systems were funded, modernized, and open to a rapidly growing population. Rashid believed that real wealth came not from what lay beneath the ground, but from what could be built above it. At the same time, he made a bold decision that would define Dubai's future in a way that few understood at the time. He began courting foreign businesses. While other Gulf states maintained tight restrictions on ownership and labor, Rashid extended a welcoming hand to the world. Indian and Iranian traders were encouraged to open shops. British firms found favorable conditions. Pakistani workers were invited to help build the city. Slowly but steadily, Dubai became a place where East met West, not just in culture, but in commerce. In 1971, the United Arab Emirates was born. With the British having announced their withdrawal from the Gulf, Sheikh Rashid worked alongside other leaders, especially Sheikh Zayed of Abu Dhabi, to form a federation. Although oil had solidified Dubai's economic standing, it was Rashid's strategic planning that positioned it as one of the federation's most influential voices. Still, he understood that Dubai's oil reserves were modest compared to Abu Dhabi's vast fields. That reality never worried him. In fact, it strengthened his resolve to build a post-oil economy before the oil itself ran dry. And so the most ambitious project yet was conceived. Jebel Ali. Jebel Ali was not just another port. It was an audacious high-stakes gamble on the future. Sheikh Rashid envisioned a deep-water port south of Dubai, large enough to handle the next generation of cargo ships, paired with an industrial-free zone that would offer foreign companies zero taxes, full ownership, and complete freedom of capital movement. At the time, many scoffed. There was no demand. There were no factories. There was no city there, just sand. But Rashid saw something others didn't. He understood that globalization was coming, and with it, a new economy built on logistics, manufacturing, and services. Jebel Ali Port officially opened in 1979. And soon after, Jebel Ali Free Zone JAFZA was established. By the end of the century, it would house thousands of international companies, contributing massively to Dubai's GDP and reshaping its global image. It remains one of the most successful economic free zones in the world. The development of Jebel Ali was more than infrastructure. It was philosophy. It said to the world, "We are open, we are ready, and we are not waiting for oil to run out to innovate." It attracted entrepreneurs, corporations, and investors from across the globe. It showed that Dubai was not just an oil town playing at capitalism, it was a capitalist city-state with a strategic plan. Meanwhile, Sheikh Rashid ensured that the Emirates' finances remained disciplined. Dubai never engaged in excessive public spending the way other oil-rich states did. The skyline was modest. The government, while supportive of growth, avoided populist welfare traps. Oil money funded development, not decadence. And in that discipline, Rashid embedded a culture of forward thinking and pragmatism that still defines Dubai today. Even the architecture of the time reflected that ethos. The first high-rise buildings in Dubai, including the World Trade Center Tower in the late 1970s, were symbols of business, not palatial excess. While other capitals built golden domes and sprawling compounds, Rashid built runways, cranes, and offices. His vision was clear: built for commerce, and the future will come. By the time of his death in 1990, Sheikh Rashid had overseen the transformation of Dubai from a small Gulf settlement into a dynamic commercial hub with one of the busiest ports, a growing expatriate population, and a foundation that was, remarkably, non-reliant on oil. It was a blueprint that his sons, especially Sheikh Mohammed ibn Rashid Al Maktoum, would take and elevate in unimaginable ways. But the core of that transformation began here, in these early years when the oil wells opened and Sheikh Rashid chose to see them not as a destination, but as a detour, a source of capital, not a definition of purpose. Where others saw the end of a journey, he saw the start of a new one. This is why Dubai stands today not as a monument to fossil fuels, but as a tribute to foresight. Its foundations may have been financed by oil, but they were built on ambition, on strategy, and on an unshakable belief that the desert could become something extraordinary. The year was 1971. The British Empire was retreating, the world was realigning, and the Arabian Peninsula stood at a crossroads. For over 150 years, the Trucial States, 7 small sheikdoms along the Gulf, had lived under British protection, their foreign affairs and defense dictated by colonial treaties. But now, with London announcing its withdrawal east of the Suez Canal, these rulers were left to shape their own destiny or face fragmentation. Sheikh Rashid Ibn Said Al Maktoum of Dubai understood the stakes better than most. His port city had become a rising commercial hub built on vision, infrastructure, and a cautious but determined use of oil wealth. But even with that momentum, Dubai alone could not stand against the geopolitical storms gathering on the horizon. He knew that unity was not just a dream, it was a necessity. In that same moment, a young man stood beside him, learning, watching, absorbing. His name was Sheikh Mohammed ibn Rashid Al Maktoum, the third son of Sheikh Rashid. Born in July of 1949, Mohammed had been groomed not only in the halls of Dubai, but abroad. After completing his secondary education at Al Ahmadiyya School and Dubai Secondary School, he studied English in Cambridge and later trained at the Monks Officer Cadet School in Aldershot, England. Military discipline, Western diplomacy, and Emirati tradition would all shape his thinking. In the final years of British rule, Sheikh Mohammed accompanied his father to historic meetings with the other Trucial rulers. These tense summits would eventually lead to the creation of a new country, the United Arab Emirates. It was not a smooth process. Bahrain and Qatar opted to remain independent. Only 7 emirates, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Ajman, Al Quwain, Fujairah, and later Ras Al Khaimah agreed to unite. Still, on December 2, 1971, the UAE was officially formed, with Abu Dhabi as the capital and Sheikh Zayed ibn Sultan Al Nahyan as president. Dubai became the federation's financial engine. Sheikh Rashid was appointed as vice president and prime minister. His son, Sheikh Mohammed, was named Minister of Defense at just 22 years old. Though young, he was not inexperienced. He had spent years observing his father manage trade deals, resolve tribal disputes, and guide Dubai through rapid modernization. Now Mohammed was charged with building a national army from scratch. It was no symbolic post. With tension simmering across the region, the Iran-Iraq border crisis, the Gulf's maritime disputes, and the Cold War's silent grip, security was paramount. Sheikh Mohammed established the UAE's first unified defense force, coordinating recruits from different emirates, building barracks, and acquiring modern equipment. Discipline, structure, and strategic vision guided the project. By 1976, the UAE armed forces were under central command, and Dubai's military capabilities had become a stabilizing force within the federation. But Mohammed's influence extended far beyond defense. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, as his father's health began to decline, Sheikh Mohammed and his brothers, especially Maktoum, Hamdan, and Ahmed, assumed increasing responsibility over Dubai's daily affairs. Together they became known as Al Abna, the sons of Rashid, and they operated with a singular mission: to fulfill their father's vision of turning Dubai into a global city. Among their earliest and boldest moves was the acceleration of development around Jebel Ali. The port itself, completed in 1979, was a triumph, but what came next was revolutionary. In 1985, Sheikh Mohammed spearheaded the creation of the Jebel Ali Free Zone Authority, or JAFZA. It offered foreign companies full ownership, zero taxes, and 100% profit repatriation. In the Middle East of the 1980s, this was unprecedented. It redefined Dubai not just as a place of commerce, but as a magnet for international capital. Sheikh Mohammed's leadership style quickly became known: decisive, bold, and unapologetically ambitious. Where his father was a patient builder, Mohammed was a disruptor. He believed Dubai had to move fast, think globally, and challenge the traditional hierarchies of Gulf power. He expanded aviation, invested in ports, and launched a national airline, Emirates, in 1985 with just 2 leased planes. Critics called it reckless. Within 2 decades, Emirates would become one of the most successful airlines in the world. Yet none of this ambition was possible without the foundation laid by Sheikh Rashid. He had instilled in his sons a sense of discipline, humility, and foresight. He had never allowed Dubai's oil wealth to become a crutch. That financial prudence would serve the family well in the turbulent decades to come. In 1990, Sheikh Rashid passed away. The city mourned not only a ruler, but a founder, a man who had transformed a coastal settlement into a rising global gateway. His eldest son, Sheikh Maktoum, became ruler of Dubai, but it was clear that Sheikh Mohammed, already commanding key ministries and projects, would continue to shape the Emirates' future. The dynasty had transitioned, but the vision had not. The 1990s would mark a turning point, not only for Dubai but for the entire Gulf. The Gulf War shifting oil markets and the rise of globalization forced new thinking on how to remain competitive in a rapidly changing world. And it would be Sheikh Mohammed who would seize that moment. But long before towers rose or islands were built, there was this critical chapter: the formation of a nation and the rise of a new generation. A young defense minister standing at the shoulder of his visionary father, quietly preparing for the day he would lead not just with loyalty to the past, but with a fierce determination to redefine the future. This was not merely the passing of power. It was the evolution of purpose. The desert had taught them patience. The sea had taught them trade. The world would soon learn what it meant when the Maktoum dynasty turned its full gaze toward tomorrow. The 1990s arrived like a sandstorm of change across the Gulf. The Cold War had ended. The Gulf War had shaken the region. Oil prices fluctuated like desert winds, and globalization was accelerating at a pace few could fully comprehend. In the middle of it all stood Dubai, ambitious, restless, and led by a man who did not believe in limits. His name was Sheikh Mohammed ibn Rashid Al Maktoum, and he was about to reshape the very definition of a city. At a time when much of the Middle East was rooted in caution and tradition, Sheikh Mohammed was looking beyond borders, beyond convention, and beyond what anyone believed a city in the desert could become. For him, the future was not something to be feared. It was something to be built. Now. The first sign of that vision came not from the ground, but from the skies. In the year 1985, Dubai launched Emirates Airline with just 2 leased aircraft and $10 million of capital. Aviation experts dismissed the project. Competing against state-funded giants like British Airways, Lufthansa, and Gulf Air seemed absurd. But Sheikh Mohammed and the Emirates chairman, Maurice Flanagan, had a radical plan. No government subsidies, no protectionist policies, and no limits on ambition. Within a decade, Emirates was flying across continents. Within 2 decades, it was an icon. But aviation was only the beginning. While many cities talked about tourism, Dubai invested in it. Sheikh Mohammed understood that tourism was not just about attracting visitors, it was about capturing the world's imagination. And to do that, he would need monuments, symbols, something unforgettable. So he began to imagine and then to build. The Burj Al Arab was unlike anything the region had ever seen. Conceived in the early 1990s and opened in the year 1999, the sail-shaped tower rose on its own artificial island just off the coast of Jumeirah Beach. Standing at over 320 meters tall, it was designed not merely as a hotel, but as a global statement. Sheikh Mohammed wanted the Burj Al Arab to become the Eiffel Tower of the Middle East. He succeeded. With interiors lined in 24-karat gold leaf, a helipad suspended in the air, and architecture that blended modernity with cultural symbolism, the Burj became a beacon not just of wealth, but of intent. But even before the Burj was finished, Sheikh Mohammed was already planning something even more audacious: to extend Dubai's shoreline by building land from the sea. The concept of Palm Jumeirah was first revealed to the public in the early 2000s, but its design and ambition were born in the final years of the 20th century. When completed, the Palm would add over 50 kilometers of beachfront to Dubai's limited coastline, offering space for villas, resorts, and hotels shaped like a giant palm tree visible from space. Skeptics laughed, engineers warned, environmentalists protested, but Dubai built it anyway. Sheikh Mohammed had a simple philosophy: if the natural world did not give you the resources you needed, create them yourself, and he applied that principle everywhere. In the financial sector, he launched the Dubai International Financial Center, an autonomous zone with its own legal system based on English common law. In the digital space, he created Dubai Internet City and Dubai Media City, offering international companies tax-free incentives and world-class infrastructure to relocate their regional headquarters. Microsoft, Oracle, CNN, and Reuters all came. So did thousands of entrepreneurs who saw opportunity in a city that dared to be different. What made Sheikh Mohammed's vision so powerful was not just its scale, but its speed. While other governments debated, Dubai executed. Permits were granted quickly. Roads appeared overnight. Regulations were written to attract, not deter. Sheikh Mohammed turned bureaucracy into efficiency and transformed doubt into drive. The government operated like a corporation with bold goals, progressive timelines, and relentless messaging. Dubai is open for business. Still, none of this was happening in a vacuum. The 1990s were a decade of immense volatility across the Arab world. The aftermath of the Gulf War had left scars. Oil prices remained unpredictable. In neighboring countries, internal unrest and conservative resistance made modernization difficult. But Dubai seemed immune, not by accident, but by design. Sheikh Mohammed focused on diversification. He knew that oil, while still relevant, was not sustainable. At its peak, oil contributed less than 10% of Dubai's GDP. The rest came from trade, tourism, aviation, logistics, real estate, and finance. By the end of the decade, Dubai's economy was the most diversified in the Gulf. That was not a natural outcome. It was the result of engineered strategy. The skyline began to change. What was once a low-rise trading port became a city of cranes and glass. Sheikh Zayed Road transformed into a corridor of commerce, lined with towers that symbolized a break from the past and a sprint toward the future. Every building that went up was a message to the world. Dubai is not waiting, it is leading. Of course, none of this could have happened without an open-door policy toward the world's talent. Foreigners were not only allowed, they were essential. Construction workers came from South Asia, architects from Europe, engineers from North America, business people from everywhere. Sheikh Mohammed fostered a culture of inclusion, not in the political sense, but in the professional one. If you could contribute to the dream, you were welcome. This cosmopolitan ecosystem became part of Dubai's identity. English became the language of business. Luxury brands filled the malls. International schools and hospitals flourished. The city had become not just a Middle Eastern success, but a global laboratory, a test case for what could be achieved when ambition was not restrained by tradition. Yet, even as the buildings rose and the profits soared, Sheikh Mohammed never lost sight of branding. Every project had a name, a purpose, a headline. Nothing was ordinary. Everything was superlative. The biggest, the tallest, the most luxurious. Dubai became a brand in itself synonymous with speed, spectacle, and possibility. And so, by the turn of the millennium, Dubai was no longer just a Gulf city. It was a global phenomenon. From 2 leased airplanes to one of the world's largest airlines, from a coastline of fishing boats to artificial islands shaped like palm trees, from a low skyline to a glittering jungle of steel and glass. Sheikh Mohammed had not just built a city, he had redefined what a city could be. The impossible was now real. But ambition, like the desert wind, never rests. Sheikh Mohammed's greatest challenge and his greatest gamble was still to come. By the early 2000s, Dubai stood taller than any city in the Middle East figuratively and literally. Its name had become synonymous with ambition, luxury, and scale. From the desert floor rose islands shaped like palms, towers kissed by clouds, and a sense of invincibility woven into its glass and steel. It was a city that defied geography, logic, and even nature. But what no one knew, not the tourists, not the foreign investors, not even many within the government, was that beneath the glimmering surface, a crisis was forming. A storm was building. And soon, Dubai's greatest triumphs would stand face to face with their greatest threat. The world had entered an age of financial euphoria. The housing markets in the United States were booming, credit flowed endlessly, and speculation became the new currency. Dubai, too, was swept up in the mania. Property prices soared. Tower cranes multiplied like palm fronds across the skyline. Projects were announced at a dizzying pace: the World Islands, Dubai Marina, Business Bay, Dubai Waterfront. Pre-construction units were sold and resold. Wealth was created on paper, and faith in the city's unstoppable growth reached near religious intensity. At the heart of this expansion was Dubai World, a government-owned conglomerate with assets spanning real estate, logistics, hospitality, and investments. Through its subsidiaries, most notably Nakheel and Limitless, it funded and built some of Dubai's most iconic developments. Backed by sovereign credibility and Sheikh Mohammed's unwavering confidence, Dubai World borrowed billions from global banks and hedge funds. The money came easily. After all, Dubai never failed. Until it did. In the year 2007, the first cracks in the global system began to appear. The subprime mortgage market in the United States started to collapse. By 2008, Lehman Brothers had fallen, stock markets around the world had plunged, and what began as a housing crisis became a full-blown global financial meltdown. Liquidity vanished, credit froze. And in Dubai, the music stopped. Overnight, real estate prices dropped by more than 50%. Construction sites were abandoned mid-rise. Tens of thousands of workers lost their jobs. Expatriates packed their bags and left behind maxed-out loans and empty towers. What had once been a miracle city became a cautionary tale. Dubai, for the first time in decades, looked vulnerable. The debt that had fueled the dream came due. Dubai World alone owed more than 50 billion US dollars. In total, Dubai's government-related entities were responsible for over 100 billion US dollars in outstanding obligations. And worse, much of it had to be repaid quickly. Sheikh Mohammed was faced with the unthinkable. His city, his empire, his masterpiece was on the brink of default. Pride had to yield to pragmatism. In late 2009, Dubai turned to its neighboring emirate and longtime partner, Abu Dhabi. The negotiations were intense. The relationship between Dubai and Abu Dhabi had always been respectful but independent. Dubai had charted its own course, sometimes diverging from the UAE's federal agenda. Now, the smaller emirate needed the deeper pockets of the capital. Abu Dhabi agreed to a $10 billion US dollar bailout. Another $10 billion followed through the UAE Central Bank. In total, $20 billion of lifeline funding was extended on condition of restructured governance, tightened fiscal oversight, and symbolic concession. On January 4, 2010, the Burj Dubai was set to open. The tower had become a metaphor for the city itself, soaring, bold, and unmatched. But the name, Burj Dubai, carried an uncomfortable weight. So in a surprise move, Sheikh Mohammed announced during the opening ceremony that the tower would be renamed the Burj Khalifa in honor of Sheikh Khalifa ibn Zayed Al Nahyan, the ruler of Abu Dhabi and president of the United Arab Emirates. To the public, it was a gesture of unity. To insiders, it was recognition of a deeper truth. Abu Dhabi had saved Dubai from collapse, but the crisis had done more than force financial recalibration. It had exposed the fragility behind the facade. The government swiftly canceled or postponed over 300 major projects. Developers went bankrupt. Thousands of luxury apartments sat empty. Hotels lowered their rates. Dubai's unemployment rate rose. The headlines, once celebratory, turned somber. And yet, amidst the rubble, Sheikh Mohammed remained defiant. He refused to accept defeat. Instead, he treated the crisis not as an end, but as a correction, a painful but necessary evolution. Within months, the government introduced new regulations to manage debt, restructure entities like Dubai World, and restore investor confidence. Dubai Holding and other firms were consolidated. Interest payments were renegotiated. Transparency was increased. Slowly, stability returned. Over the next 2 years, Dubai clawed its way back. Tourism began to recover, particularly from emerging markets like Russia, China, and India. Emirates Airline expanded into new routes. The Jebel Ali Free Zone remained resilient. Expo 2020 was awarded to Dubai, promising a new wave of global attention and investment. The lessons of the crisis became etched into policy: diversify, regulate, and never again allow unchecked speculation to outpace sustainable growth. Yet, the psychological toll remained. The city that had once marketed itself as recession-proof had been exposed. Faith had been shaken, pride had been bruised, and the very leadership that had driven Dubai's meteoric rise was now tasked with managing its humbled recovery. Still, Dubai did not disappear. In fact, it adapted. The narrative shifted from invincibility to resilience, from unchecked ambition to recalibrated strategy. Sheikh Mohammed doubled down on innovation, announcing plans for a smart city, drone taxes, and artificial intelligence governance. Real estate development slowed but evolved, now focused on middle-income housing and long-term value instead of luxury spectacle alone. In many ways, the crisis had accomplished what no regulation or external pressure could. It forced Dubai to mature. The model that emerged after 2010 was not less ambitious, but more deliberate. The lessons learned were not just financial, they were personal, political, and cultural. The Burj Khalifa still stands today as the tallest structure on Earth. But behind its name is a story of crisis and compromise. It is a monument not only to engineering, but to humility. A reminder that even the most dazzling dreams must rest on foundations of stability, transparency, and shared strength. Dubai did not collapse, but it cracked. And through those cracks, something new emerged, not a smaller vision, but a wiser one. In the years following the global financial crisis, Dubai re-emerged from the sandstorm of debt and doubt with renewed purpose. Its skyline, though briefly shadowed by economic uncertainty, resumed its climb. Investments returned, confidence was rebuilt, and the emirate once again positioned itself as a global hub for tourism, finance, and innovation. But behind the polished surface of glass towers and gold-plated hotels, a different narrative simmered, one less visible to tourists and investors, but impossible to ignore. Dubai had always walked a delicate line. It offered a face of modernity to the world, cosmopolitan, efficient, luxurious. But beneath that exterior was a tightly controlled political system dominated by the Al Maktoum dynasty. At its center stood Sheikh Mohammed ibn Rashid Al Maktoum, ruler of Dubai, vice president and prime minister of the United Arab Emirates, and the architect of its transformation. Sheikh Mohammed was admired across the globe for his leadership and vision. He published books, delivered speeches, and launched massive national projects like the Mars mission, the Artificial Intelligence Ministry, and the Smart City Initiative. He was a poet, a horse breeder, a military-trained strategist, and a leader who demanded speed and perfection from his government. But as the international spotlight grew brighter, so did the scrutiny. Dubai's success depended on attracting the world's elite, and with them came global media, watchdogs, and human rights organizations. The Emirates' tightly managed press could not shield it from external criticism forever. Allegations began to emerge about labor conditions, about political freedoms, and eventually, about the ruler's own private life. In March of 2018, a shocking story broke the carefully curated image. One of Sheikh Mohammed's daughters, Sheikha Latifa bint Mohammed Al Maktoum, attempted to flee Dubai by boat. She recorded a video alleging years of surveillance and restriction, claiming she had been held against her will. The escape was intercepted in international waters near the coast of India by Emirati commandos. Latifa was returned to Dubai, and for months, nothing was heard from her. The video spread across global media. Human rights organizations raised alarms. The UN demanded answers. Dubai responded by releasing staged photographs of Latifa alongside diplomats, claiming she was safe and cared for. But the narrative was cracked. Western governments grew uneasy. The once untouchable image of Dubai's royal family was now entangled in controversy. Then, in 2019, the story escalated. Princess Haya bin Hussein of Jordan, the second wife of Sheikh Mohammed, fled the country with her 2 children. She later filed for custody in the High Court of Justice in London, claiming she feared for her life and for the safety of her children. The case drew global attention not only for its tabloid allure, but for the precedent it set: a sitting head of government being investigated in a British court over allegations of abduction, intimidation, and abuse. The court ruled in favor of Princess Haya, concluding in 2020 that Sheikh Mohammed had orchestrated campaigns of fear and surveillance against her and his daughters. The judgment was devastating not just legally, but reputationally. For the first time, the architect of Dubai's rise had been publicly rebuked on the international stage. Still, within the UAE, the power dynamics remained unchanged. The ruling structure allowed for little dissent. Political opposition did not exist. Journalists operated within strict boundaries. The state maintained a zero-tolerance policy toward public criticism. Sheikh Mohammed's control over Dubai. His significant influence over the federal policies of the UAE was absolute. The contrast between Dubai's public image and its private operations became increasingly difficult to reconcile. On one hand, it remained a beacon of luxury, innovation, and ambition, a playground for billionaires, a crossroads for global trade, and a host city for Expo 2020. On the other, it operated under the principles of authoritarian efficiency. With limited political freedoms, systemic labor issues, and opaque governance. Labor, in particular, had long been a point of contention. The city's rapid development had been built on the backs of hundreds of thousands of migrant workers, primarily from South Asia. While many found economic opportunity, others endured exploitative contracts, long hours, and restricted movement. Due to the now-defunct kafala sponsorship system, reports of passport confiscations, delayed wages, and substandard living conditions tarnished the shine of Dubai's progress. Reforms were introduced, but enforcement remained inconsistent. At the same time, Dubai's media strategy evolved. The emirate leaned into digital governance, e-services, and futuristic branding. It launched the Museum of the Future, created blockchain initiatives, and announced ambitious climate and space programs. Criticism was either ignored or drowned out by carefully crafted campaigns of success and optimism. To Sheikh Mohammed, Dubai's story was always about advancement. He viewed progress not through the lens of political pluralism, but through infrastructure, economic metrics, and international accolades. And for many citizens and expatriates, this trade-off seemed acceptable. Stability, security, and prosperity, if tightly managed, were preferable to chaos and uncertainty in a region often plagued by conflict. Still, the world had changed. The rise of social media, investigative journalism, and global activism made it harder for even the most image-conscious governments to shield themselves from scrutiny. And while Dubai remained a leader in innovation and global connectivity, its governance model faced growing questions. Could a city built on openness to the world afford to remain closed politically? Could ambition be sustained indefinitely without accountability? Could the same ruler who built a miracle also face the consequences of the control that made it possible? These were the questions that lingered unanswered behind the skyline. And while Dubai's economy recovered, its image remained in delicate balance, admired for what it had achieved, but increasingly examined for how it had done so. The emirate had become a symbol of 21st century ambition. But ambition alone was not enough. Control, however absolute, brought with it a new burden: transparency, scrutiny, and the test of time. And for Sheikh Mohammed, the final chapters of his legacy were still being written, not just in concrete and gold, but in the hearts and minds of a changing world. From the windswept shores of the Arabian Gulf to the tallest tower on earth, the journey of Dubai is a modern epic, a story not of oil, war, or ancient dynasties, but of vision, speed, and the defiant will of a man who believed that destiny could be built from sand. Sheikh Mohammed ibn Rashid Al Maktoum's legacy is carved not in marble or myth, but in concrete, steel, glass, and ambition. He took a desert port with a population of fewer than 100,000 in the mid-20th century and transformed it into a global crossroads of commerce, technology, finance, and luxury. Over the span of 5 decades, the city became a symbol not just of wealth, but of reinvention. And yet, for all the architectural marvels and business triumphs, Sheikh Mohammed's legacy cannot be understood through buildings alone. To grasp the true weight of his story, one must look beyond the skyline. At the heart of his success was a singular, often misunderstood philosophy: act first, explain later. His governance was fast, top-down, and unapologetically centralized. This allowed for breathtaking efficiency. Projects that would take years elsewhere were completed in months. Bureaucracy bowed to momentum, and while critics labeled it authoritarian, supporters called it visionary. But no legacy is without contradiction. For every marvel like the Burj Khalifa or the Palm Jumeirah, there were stories of laborers paid too little and housed too poorly. For every bold reform in artificial intelligence or blockchain, there were questions about surveillance and personal freedom. And for every global headline that celebrated innovation, there was another that questioned the cost of control, both personal and political. Still, the model worked because it delivered. The city's infrastructure ranked among the best in the world. Its ports and airports handled millions of visitors and billions of dollars in goods. Tourism became a cornerstone of the economy, with visitors arriving not just for leisure, but for business, events, and opportunity. Foreign direct investment surged. Multinational companies established regional headquarters in a city that, unlike much of the region, offered political stability and first-world systems. The idea was never to become just another Gulf city. The goal was to leapfrog to become the Singapore of the Middle East, the global city of tomorrow. Sheikh Mohammed did not want to be remembered as a ruler who preserved. He wanted to be known as a ruler who transformed. He understood that oil would run dry, but ideas would not. So he poured resources into education, into technology, into diversifying the economy faster than any neighbor. He turned Dubai into a testing ground for autonomous vehicles, drone taxis, and AI-powered governance. He made innovation a matter of national pride. And yet, as Dubai entered the third decade of the 21st century, new questions emerged. Climate change, regional conflicts, the balance between sustainability and growth, the weight of the debt incurred during the city's most aggressive expansion phases still lingered, and the geopolitical winds that had once favored Dubai began to shift unpredictably, more quietly. The role of Dubai within the United Arab Emirates itself continued to evolve. Its relationship with Abu Dhabi, the federal capital, and the country's oil-rich anchor remained complex, a mixture of partnership and quiet rivalry. Where Abu Dhabi focused on consolidation, Dubai pursued boldness. Together, they shaped the UAE's identity. One foot in tradition, the other racing toward the future. And what of Sheikh Mohammed, the man behind it all? Now in his 70s, he remained active, publishing poetry, overseeing development plans, and launching reforms. But the world around him had changed. The era of unchecked globalism was fading. Populism and protectionism rose in the West. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed both the vulnerabilities and strengths of centralized systems, and the global spotlight that had once adored Dubai began to interrogate it with greater depth. In all, Sheikh Mohammed remained steadfast. His philosophy of leadership, often expressed in his own words, rested on a few core beliefs: lead by example, take risks boldly, and never stop learning. He spoke of service, of ambition, of urgency, and above all, of legacy. Because in the end, that is what remains. The legacy of a man who, like the desert around him, refused to be defined by what others believed was possible. A man who challenged the limits of geography, time, and tradition. A man who turned Dubai from a humble fishing village into a gravitational center of global ambition. Was it perfect? No. Was it repeatable? Likely not. But was it real? Undeniably. Dubai stands as a monument to human determination. Its towers may gleam with wealth, but its story shines with something more powerful: belief. The belief that in a world too often limited by caution, one city, led by one visionary, dared to build the impossible. And though its journey is far from over, The desert now holds more than sand. It holds legacy. It holds proof. It holds the echo of a dream that began not with riches, but with resolve. The forgotten billionaire who built Dubai from sand will not be forgotten after all.